Ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome to this briefing. Before we start, just a couple of house rules before I hand over to my colleague Ruth. If you have any questions for either of our speakers on today's subject, because I know there are a few journalists joining us, please use the chat facility, and I'll open that up in a second. And if you can identify yourself and your media outlet, because some people, or any other outlet at all, or just purely speaking, are asking a question as an individual, you can do that in the chat facility, and then we can call you during the Q&A. And before we start, can I just on a personal note express my delight in being able to welcome Markus Sheff here. Markus is a particular individual that is an advocate for Israel I've long admired, and purely and simply because he gets to the heart of the matter very, very quickly, and he understands the importance of education, and how education is a real tool in combating hate, in working towards peace, and in changing outcomes for children in terms of for the future. He's had tremendous success across the world. In fact, just recently, the State Department in the US published a report quoting Markus Sheff's organization, Impact SE, extensively for their solid work and their reviewing of curriculums. And in fact, if one looks at the recent process of normalization with countries towards Israel, education played a key part in that. Curriculums played a key part in that. And in fact, even Saudi Arabia, which has traditionally been hostile towards Israel, has amended and changed its curriculums for the better. And of course, Markus and his organization keeps across that. There is, of course, one dark blot in all of that, and that remains the Palestinian Authority, and particularly how the Palestinians are educating their children. So when we talk about a peace process of Israel, one which is badly needed after what we saw the last few weeks, one immediately starts thinking about education and are people ready on the ground? And if people on the ground are being taught literally from the cradle to the grave to hate, that makes the job extremely difficult. And we all have a role to play in that. So with that said, I'd like to welcome everyone, remind you again about the chat facility, and I will hand over to my dear colleague and our head of the institutional relations, Ruth, to take it from here. And of course, I'll catch up with you all very, very shortly. Thank you, and you're very welcome.
Thank you, Alex. So again, welcome from me also. I am the head of EU relations for the European Jewish Association, and my colleague Alex. As you can see, APA stands for Europe-Israel Public Affairs, for those who are not aware. Alex already welcomed our first speaker, which is Mr. Markus Sheff. So I'm going to also welcome, and just to say what a delight it is to have MEP Lukas Mandl from Austria. We'll hear from him second. So, but because of that, I would like to maybe give you a very brief minute if you want to also introduce yourself and Lukas, and just welcome our guest.
Thanks for the invite, Ruth, and thanks everybody for your interest. I look forward to Markus Sheff's contribution to today's talk. He's really a highly renowned expert. I'm serving in the European Parliament on behalf of my constituency. This is the Republic of Austria, and I have the privilege to head the multi-partisan and interparliamentary group of the Transatlantic Friends of Israel in the European Parliament. And that's why I'm more than happy about our ongoing cooperation with the European Jewish Association and with, let's say, all like-minded all around the world, because it's needed on behalf not only of the people of Israel, but of the values we represent, and on behalf of the security we try to achieve for this generation and the generations ahead.
Thank you. So we look forward to hearing from MEP Mandl a little bit later. First, we're going to have Mr. Sheff. A delight again to have you. We follow obviously your organization's wonderful work, and our guests are ready to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruth, Alex, and Deepa. And I'm honored to share this virtual platform with Mr. Lukas Mandl, who has done so much to try and ensure that EU funds are not used to teach 1.3 million Palestinian children to hate, but are used for peace education. So I'll start by saying we all know textbooks are uniquely authoritative. They convey the political and social values that society wants to impart to the next generation. But this is particularly so in the Middle East, where outside of Israel, you tend to get one book, one subject, one grade. And so, while textbooks can be a powerful barrier against acting out violence, unfortunately, they can also be a blueprint for radicalization, as we do see so much in the region. So since 1998, Impact SE has been examining Middle East textbooks through UNESCO derived standards of peace and tolerance. Those are respect for the other, respect for the individual other, gender equality, no hate, peacemaking as the way to resolve conflict, economic prosperity, historical accuracy, and the really non-UNESCO standard of LGBTQ respect. And I have to say that there is good news. Our research shows there are improvements going on now across many textbooks. The most obvious example is the UAE, which teaches a moral education course, as they call it, which is actually quite remarkable. It teaches what is called wasatiyah, moderation, the middle way, tolerance, respect, and peacemaking. And Sheikh Mohammed bin Ziyad reformed the national curriculum. It was written by the Muslim Brotherhood, and in 2006, he essentially did that root and branch reform. We are reviewing it now, so no spoilers at this point. But let me say that so far, I think we can find it holds a leadership position in relation to curricula in the region. But it is not just in the UAE. In Jordan, King Abdullah II reformed that Jordanian curriculum in 2014. It was, if you like, a corollary of his thinking following the Amman letter of 2004 and the conference of 2005. And he produced a much more inclusive, tolerant set of textbooks, particularly in respect to how Islam and other religions are portrayed. Tunisia, we found, has been, if you like, a long-running model. For many years, textbooks there have educated about the importance of negotiations, peace, respect for the other, and teaching their own colonial past, but without hate. As Alex alluded to, our report into the Saudi Arabian curriculum in 2019 highlighted dozens of offending examples of hate, which needed to be removed. And our report was delivered to the highest levels of the Saudi kingdom, and they decided to act. And so reviewing the September 2020 books, as we did, we saw really significant improvements. For instance, an infamous hadith that stated that Muslims will kill all Jews was taken out. Classic anti-Semitic trope that Jews control the world was also taken out. This shows that change is possible, and it wasn't just about anti-Semitism. We had shown there was a whole chapter which was terribly homophobic. They entirely took that out. Really large pieces of material in relation to violent jihad was removed. So these things can be done, and they can be done quickly. Israeli textbooks, obviously we look at constantly, while not perfect, promote peacemaking as the way to resolve conflict. They depict Palestinian history, narrative, national struggle, including, by the way, using that term Nakba, and the individual Palestinian other, which is so important. I will say that ultra-Orthodox textbooks, they don't incite, but they need improving. They are not up to standard, and it's an issue we do take up with the Israeli Ministry of Education. Clearly, it is not all rosy. The Turkish curriculum was significantly radicalized by Erdogan in recent years. Jihad war was introduced as a central value, along with ethno-nationalist religious vision, which combines neo-Ottomanism and pan-Turkism. The Iranian textbooks are terrible. Demonize Jews, glorify terror, talk about hegemony in the region, and the Syrian textbooks are radically Ba'athist, even in this day and age, as I'm sure you would imagine. And in Qatar, despite the US influence on textbooks, anti-Semitism is unfortunately still central. And so in relation to the Palestinian textbooks, and looking, if you like, at that, that context in which they lie, they were totally reformed by the Palestinian Authority in 2016. And with Turkey, it has to be said, they are the example in the region of textbooks actually getting worse rather than better. So a reform took place and they got worse. And in this curriculum, peace is not presented to Palestinian children as preferred or even possible. Peace agreements and proposals with Israel, which previously did appear in PA school books, were totally removed. There's one cursory mention of the Oslo Accords, with Arafat's letter to Rabin doctored, changed to take out his remarks on cooperation with Israel. And essentially pupils are taught that negotiations are not the way to achieve statehood. So the question is, what is in their place? And the answer is, Jews are presented as liars, fraudsters, the enemies of Islam. They control finance, media, and politics. This is what it says in the textbooks. Children in the first grade, year 1, are taught a reading exercise using the letter Ha, the Arabic letter. And the choices they are given are Shahid, martyr, Hujum, attack, and Harab, run away. So, we're talking about 6-year-olds here, and this is how they're taught the Arabic language. 9-year-olds learn maths, not by adding apples and oranges like we might have done, but by adding the martyrs of the intifadas. How many martyrs died in the first? How many martyrs in the second? How many have you got? And by the way, when we're talking about martyrs, we're talking about, people who blew up pizzerias and shopping centers and buses. Newton's second law of motion is taught by encouraging 12-year-olds to endanger themselves, essentially, and involved in violent conflict. And, Palestinian children are taught that death is a right, that dying is better than living. These are Salafi ideas which have no place in today's peaceful societies. They were taught a poem about sacrificing blood, 9-year-olds, to eliminate the usurper and to annihilate the foreigners. And 14-year-old boys taught that if they attack and get killed, they will be rewarded with 72 brides in paradise. While girls are taught to be equal with the boys, they also need to engage in violence and become martyrs too. And Dalal Moghrabi, terrorist who killed 38 people, including 13 children, is a role model in these textbooks to young girls. And I just give one final example. The 1972 Munich Olympic massacre is justified in these textbooks. Terrorists are glorified, and there is absolutely no contextualization whatsoever for this terror, only glorification. So none of this, of course, has gone unnoticed. This European Parliament has twice passed cross-party legislation, discharges, overwhelmingly condemning hate in the Palestinian curriculum. The United Nations' own Committee to Eradicate Racism and Discrimination in August of 2019 condemned the anti-Semitism in the PA textbooks following a session we were involved in. And of course, the Norwegian government has cut funding to the PA Ministry of Education because of incitement in the textbooks. I want to say just a few words about UNRWA. UNRWA wrote their own material in 2020. And shockingly, much of that was as bad as the material of the Palestinian Authority. And really important, UNRWA teaches the Palestinian Authority's textbooks in its own schools in Gaza and the West Bank. During COVID, they created their own materials. One would have thought a UN organization would do better. It was just as bad as the material that they teach in the schoolrooms. Content that violates UN values, UNESCO standards, and UNRWA's own stated principles, promoting hate teaching, incitement to violence, glorification of jihad, martyrdom, and terrorism. And in Israel, a UN member state, is erased off all maps of a UN organization, UNRWA, and called the enemy. It is a really dangerous set of materials. Students are called to defend the motherland with blood. Again, Dalal Mughrabi is glorified, and dangerous libels and conspiracies are propagated, such as the Zionists intentionally set fire to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that Israel deliberately dumps radioactive and toxic waste in the West Bank. And by the way, UNRWA teaching cards even denounced the peace between Israel and Arab nations. This is an organization which is supposed to be neutral. And so, while UNRWA acknowledged that, as they say, inappropriate material was produced, mistakenly produced, this material has never been taken back. There's never been an explanation for why this happened. There's never been an explanation for what they are going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And again, it's still in circulation. So the European Parliament condemned UNRWA's hate teaching in May of this year, and absolutely rightly so. And if I've got a moment, just finally a couple of words on the EU review of the PA curriculum, which is being done by the George Eckart Institute. You might have seen that in the last week or two, the German newspapers Bild and Welt obtained copies of the report, and their stories revealed that the EU's own report on the PA curriculum teaches, shows that there is teaching of anti-Semitism, that children are encouraged to violence and to jihad, that Israel is delegitimized. As both Bild and Welt said, this curriculum is entirely unfit for purpose. And we have independently assessed the report. We also got a copy, and we see that it concurs with many of our own findings over the last 5 years, and while missing some material, quite a lot, and misrepresenting others. But I'll just give you headlines. These Palestinian textbooks in the report, the EU report, persist in the promotion of Jew hatred. Jews are referred to as enemies of Islam, for instance. The report confirms that those peace agreements were taken out. The report confirms that the curriculum purposefully delegitimizes and demonizes Israel, and that the textbooks promote violence, particularly against Israel. So for this reason, lawmakers in the European Parliament and in the Bundestag have criticized the EU Commission for its secrecy, because this report has not yet been released by the EU. And, it's been on everyone's desk, frankly, for months now. They have failed to publish this long-awaited report on Palestinian textbooks, which was already delayed for 2 years. And these newspapers called into question the continued funding of the Palestinian education system, given this current state of affairs. I must say the report, does miss a great deal of material. There are serious shortcomings in terms of how it presents and what is missed. Most of the books are not reviewed, so most of the hate is missed. Some books they did review, but missed things they should have seen. And astonishingly, and this is the last point I will make before I finish, the report makes sweeping conclusions about positive changes based on material that neither we nor the researchers can ascertain were ever taught. These are altered books. They're not on the Palestinian Authority's Ministry of Education portal. They were not there when the report was written. They are not there now. There are no printed versions in circulation. And the George Eckart Institute even acknowledges that these alterations were given to them by the EU after the report was finalized. So this is, really quite astonishing. And, answers really need to be given about this. So Ruth, I will end there. And I hope I haven't gone on for too long.
Marcus, it's such a pleasure to hear from you. You are very much on point, and of course, you have been longer. So we will now ask MEP Mandl to unmute yourself. We want to ask your perspective on this subject, specifically also, if possible, if you can touch on this EU report that was basically hidden or kept. There have been a lot of questions, and people want something in terms of accountability. And maybe, as I said, you can give your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm not able to add any expertise to what Markus Sheff already has stated and conveyed very well and informative, and I thank him for that, and I'm closely listening. I just can share the state of play, so to speak, in the parliamentary work in European Parliament towards the EU Commission and in some respects also the EU member states. Actually, we have this study, the findings of Impact C, which have now also been confirmed by the EU Commission Georg Eckert Institute study. And in my view, and not only in my view, but in the view of a large number of colleagues from various political groups in European Parliament, the Commission must publish the report immediately without further ado. Actually, it's paid by European taxpayers, and European taxpayers have the absolute right to receive proper and fully fledged information on the usage of their money here. Actually, it's unacceptable that EU taxpayers' money is used to indoctrinate Palestinian children, as Markus Sheff has already pointed out, that these textbooks deny Israel's very existence, preach anti-Semitism, incitement, and the glorification of violence and terrorism. On a geopolitical level or on a foreign policy level or whatever you might call it, a negotiated two-state solution is also far, far away if things like that are still in place. So also those who, let's say, want to take shortcuts sometimes to things that can never happen without a security guarantee for the people of Israel and other things, must understand that this development is not supportive at all, not regarding the children of the Palestinians, not regarding the usage of EU taxpayers' money, not regarding the fight against anti-Semitism, and not regarding any geopolitical goal that might be existent. The Commission must act immediately and withhold some funding to the Palestinian Authority until it finally replaces these terrible textbooks, like Norway has done last year. So Norway, as you all may know, is not a EU member country, but a European country that has already acted accordingly already last year. Together with colleagues from the multi-partisan Transatlantic Friends of Israel group, I wrote open letters, several ones over the month and more than a year, to Josep Borrell, the High Representative, the so-called Foreign Minister of the European Union, to Neighborhood Commissioner Oliver Vaheli, who seems to be rather supportive due to what I understand from talks with him, and Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, asking them to put part of the funding to the Palestinians in reserve until positive changes are made. These concerns, as Markus Sheff has already pointed out today, are shared by a significant majority in the European Parliament with regard to UNRWA fundings in the European Parliament's discharge report 2019 on the EU general budget. It's reiterated that concerns about hate and violence being taught in Palestinian textbooks and that the salaries paid to teachers and public servants in the education sectors must be made conditional. Conditionality is the key word on educational material and course content complying with UNESCO standards. Actually, US Secretary of State Blinken also said last Tuesday that the Biden administration's funding of UNRWA is contingent on educational reform, referring to educational materials that remove Israel from the map and praise terrorism and martyrdom. Well, actually, we face here a situation where we have to discuss things that are not discussable. It's anti-Semitic ideology that is spread among children in formal education procedures. This is among the worst things that can happen at all on this planet. And this is in Israel. And this is something that must never be funded by EU taxpayers' money or any other public money, and should not be funded generally. And that's why we push things forward. I can also share with you the development of last week and this week, that there was let's say, a probability that the European Commission will put money for Palestinian textbooks on reserve until things are solved. In the beginning of this week, it seems that further action will be needed until this will happen. Well, we have to not only to be patient, but also to be very active and remain engaged and remain pushing the European Commission. This is clearly a parliamentary obligation we face here in European Parliament, but we are happy about each and everybody joining us, from NGOs, from business, civil society to science, academia, whatever, and whoever it might be, in order to convey the message to the European Commission that this actually draws a dark shadow on today's EU, that it's not clear what to decide, how to decide, and to decide quickly. That's why we will keep on running in that field. Actually, we all, I can imagine, we all wish for a world where children are educated in the first place by example, as all education is by example usually, are educated by example to respect each other and to support each other and to understand mankind as one entity where each and everybody is dependent on each other. The pandemic is bad, but it provides us with this lesson, actually, that this would be right and true and for the better of these generations and the future. But the other way around is happening. Children are indoctrinating against others. And this is nothing we can let happen if we mean it when we talk about European values. And that's why we are active on a parliamentary level, and very thankful again for the cooperation with the European Jewish Association and all the great experts all around the planet who don't stop to figure out what's really going on in order to provide a good basis for proper political decisions.
Dear MEP Mandl, first of all, thank you so much. The information you gave is very valuable, I would say, and important. The fact that the European Commission, or that there are commissioners who take this issue very seriously, we are aware of that. And I think there's almost, I would say, I think it's an open secret that there is almost an internal fight regarding the political direction. I want to say, you mentioned earlier that the majority of the European Parliament, or that there are a lot of members of the European Parliament that take this issue seriously and they're working towards a solution. I want to just offer very briefly, very humbly, the example of my husband. He's just a simple taxpayer. He knows how hard I personally work towards this issue. And he basically is asking me why there are no results. You keep on saying that, oh, there is this resolution, there is this report, there is condemnation from the UN report, and why I don't see any changes? Why am I continuing as a taxpayer to keep on supporting something that I think is fundamentally wrong, as you said, which has to do with not only for the fact that it's demonization towards Jewish people, but the fact that we are putting young people in danger, basically. They're putting themselves into danger, and we are paying for them to be indoctrinated into martyrdom and terror attacks and so forth. So is there a simple answer to that? Maybe I can ask both of you. Is there a simple answer on, there are a lot of these types of briefings. I have been to many conferences. I have seen very high level politicians, both on the US that you very correctly mentioned, and here in the European continent. When do you think we might see something more concrete? Marcus, we can start with you.
Okay. I think it's well above my pay grade to to try and understand why, given the enormous amount of information, evidence that has been at everyone's fingertips now for so many years, why it has still been possible for this to be ignored in favor of, what is essentially the status quo, what is in favor of, the Commission continuing with the same methodologies, with the same thing it has done for so many years, as if this information doesn't exist. It puzzles me too. And so I entirely understand your husband. I can say, though, that we have seen examples, and Lukas pointed this out, of places, and Norway is the example of this, where a responsible set of politicians have looked at the evidence, have made an assessment that they don't want their taxpayers to be involved in inciting children to violence. They did not get into the game of aid to the Palestinian Authority's Ministry of Education in order to incite children, but to give them a peace education, to give them a better life, to give them hope and something to look forward to, and to give them tools for a better life. And they came to the conclusion that the only way that they can move that forward is by withdrawing their own funds, in order that the Palestinian Authority will understand that it has to make those changes. Now, and unfortunately, there is not the understanding, as far as I can see, on the side of the Palestinian Authority, of the gravity of the situation. The Palestinian Prime Minister made a comment before a cabinet meeting after the Norwegian announcement was made, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but not by much, he said, we will take money from electricity and we will take money from water before we will take money away from printing these textbooks. And I think, my reading of that is how much this material is a national strategy for the Palestinian Authority, this vision of this one state Palestine from the river to the sea, which will be gained through violence, through the sacrifice of young people, how much that is a national strategy. And that is, that's unfortunately a very depressing conclusion, but my conclusion nonetheless. Having said that, I think more and more of, those who share the view of the Norwegians that they do not want to be in the incitement game. They want to be in the game of improving lives of Palestinians, draw the same conclusion as the Norwegians, and withdraw funding for those textbooks, I think can only be a good thing and a positive thing.
Thank you. MEP Mandl.
Yeah, I can only share my view on things that even because there is more complexity in dealing with clear positions when it comes to the Middle East and Israel, we even have to put more effort on these questions. We have today the question of Palestinian textbooks, and we have to keep on running on that. But I share with you a different view. I'm more than happy to serve for my home country, Austria, in the European Parliament in the era of the Prime Minister Sebastian Kurz in my home country, because we have a clear, holistic, so to speak, Austrian position when it comes to no matter whether it would be the government level or the parliamentary level when it comes to the Middle East and Israel. But in the public opinion, so to speak, in media and otherwhere, in social media especially, when Israel was heavily attacked by terrorists, and we know them all and we follow them, and we try to prohibit their activities in Europe by law, by parliamentary and government decisions, and so on. When Israel was attacked, it was clear that our Prime Minister Sebastian Kurz showed the public with the Israeli flag on the main government building in our capital, Vienna. And there was critics, not by a majority, but by a pretty loud minority. And I just asked around when I was interviewed on that and so on, and I approached people with one simple question. If France would be attacked by terrorists, or the United Kingdom would be attacked by terrorists, maybe these attacks would be far more little than the ones against Israel and the Israel civilian population. Nobody would doubt that it's a clear signal that in the capital of Austria, in Vienna, or in other European capitals and in other parts of the world, especially the free world, the public would be presented with the flag of France or the UK then. But when it comes to Israel, there are discussions. And I don't want to deal with that all my life. And I don't want my children to experience these differences in treating one state differently to each and every other state. And that's why, there is complexity, even if it's not with regard to content and not with regard to reason, but it's existing, and we know the background, the ideological background of these movements, and that's why we all requested to do our work in that field and to try whatever we can to create a leverage for a better understanding and a better future.
Thank you. I think my husband, I mentioned it, he lobbies me harder than other lobbyists. So he just wants to see results, just like any other, I just mentioned it, obviously, it's just like any other concerned citizen. We just want to see that our money is not used towards violence, obviously. We're opening the floor for some questions. We have a member of parliament that wanted to speak also, but I'm just going to see whether he's available. My colleague Alex Benjamin, if you have a question, I think you have a question in the chat that you wanted to read, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So actually, one of the questions from was already answered in terms of it was a similar question to your husband's. So that's been dealt with. A couple of other inquiries. One, Marcus, specifically as to where people can find this physical examples of the kind of stuff that goes on in the Palestinian textbooks. I suggested on the chat to check out your own resources that you have at Impact SC. So I presume that's probably the best place to go. And we have a question from Mikol Ottolenghi. He says, is defunding textbooks the only viable solution? Would that harm overall access to education for Palestinian students? And if I may, I'm going to staple on an addendum to that question. And my question is as follows. Let's say that we do enact some changes in textbooks, which is great. And Marcus was already alluding to the positive changes that have happened in places like Saudi when there is engagement. But if the Palestinian Authority leadership is still carrying on with its sort of blood and thunder rhetoric, is it largely a pointless exercise? Maybe we can come to MEP Mandl first on that. The specific question about will a reduction or will freezing education harm the overall access to education for Palestinian students? MEP Mandl?
I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. The question is whether the general education, the opportunities of Palestinian students would be harmed.
The question was if we defund, let's say, for example, that we do defund and we say, okay, no more money to the Palestinian Authority for textbooks, what impact that has on the ground, and does it effectively deny? Does it have any negative effects? And I was adding to that the question, well, you know, if the Palestinian Authority leadership is still spouting their hate speech and no filthy Jewish feet on the Temple Mount, every drop of blood spilt is martyrdom, and etc. You know, does it really make a huge difference on ground level?
I guess yes, for at least two different reasons. The one is it's a leverage. I guess also for, I don't know, other fields of education, they are in need of this money. Generally, EU is the largest contributor to development aid on this planet, and in this field, our money is needed for at least the structures without any regard to content or ideology. And if we stop to pay due to this ideological violent content, due to this anti-Semitic content, it will be a leverage for the management of the whole education system. That's the one side. And the other side is it provides the world and maybe other institutions with a different view on things, that we stop to accept violent ideologies in whatever kind of cooperation with EU or with EU institutions. We have red lines, and we don't only tell about red lines in beautiful speeches, but we actually effect these red lines when it comes to violations of them like that. And this leverage on the one side and this example on the other side seem to me as something that really can make a difference on the ground.
Thank you, MEP Mandl. I'm just going to come to one more question, which comes from Tina Adcock, who is at the think tank Audiatur Online. Question is, what is the EU funding besides UNRWA? And we'll go to Marcus for this one, if this is okay. The question is, what kind of school books are the Israel Arab schools using, and are they different of the schools in Judea and Samaria? I mean, that's a rather technical question, but is there a difference, Marcus?
Yeah, so I mean, happy to answer that. So the Israeli Arabs study the Israeli curriculum in Arabic. That is the best way of putting it. You know, ultimately, it's always about graduating to go to you know, working for a particular graduation in every country. You know, in the UK, it's A levels, right? You know, so you know, the Israeli version of A levels would be what's called the Bagrut, the graduation. And so for Jewish students, they would be studying these the textbooks that they study in Hebrew. And most, not all, but most Arab students in Israeli schools are studying the same textbooks in Arabic. There are, you know, some differences, some changes here or there, but you know, to a great extent, it is exactly the same. So, without drilling down too much, but you have the state system, the state religious system, and the Arabic school system, pretty much studying the same thing, because the state religious just have the extra hours for you know, religious studies, essentially. Then, of course, there is the ultra religious sector. They have a hodgepodge of different textbooks. There's a question in Israel about whether the boys after the age of 13 are actually, you know, studying anything really except for religious studies, and the girls much more. And as I mentioned, you know, those textbooks are not great. They do not incite, because, you know, the ultra religious are essentially pacifists, actually. But, you know, they need modernizing, I would put it that way. So, you know, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. I think so. And yeah, I mean, back to Lukas, sorry, back to MEP Mandl, sorry, overly familiar there. I beg your pardon.
It's Lukas, absolutely, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for that.
Can I just say that we have events with Americans, Alex and I will say Your Excellency, we say MEP, so on forth. The Americans are all first name basis, where Alex and I were a little bit old fashioned. So.
Okay, Lukas, I'm going to stick with it, seeing as you give me permission. Lukas, so what sort of money are we talking about here when we're talking about EU funds? Specifically, okay, so we know about UNRWA. But when it comes to education, I mean, it's very, very, very difficult, because presumably there's a lot of different funding streams, and you need to be a bit of an expert to understand well, you are an expert, but I meant myself to understand the arcane, opaque processes of EU funding. What sort of money are we talking about here? You know, Ruth was alluding earlier on to taxpayers' money. You know, ballpark figures of what we're giving to the Palestinian Authority, which is supporting this stuff, and secondly, based on what you were saying about, you know, we have to do it, we have the red lines. It's very, very important to have red lines. What do you think the pushback will be from the Palestinian Authority side? I think specifically the example of a martyrs fund where they were giving money to support terrorist families, a sort of sliding scale of reward depending on what the terrorists had done to Israeli citizens. You know, top billing, top money going to people that have been assassinated. You get a lesser amount if you just blow somebody's hand off. I'm being facetious, but this is basically what we're talking about. So I'm wondering what kind of pushback one can expect in terms of, you spoke earlier on about leverage. So yeah, basically, what sort of money are we talking about, and you know, what kind of pushback can we expect?
When we talk about EU money, we always talk about membership fees from the 27 member states. That means 1.something% of the GDP of a member state is transferred to EU level as a membership fee. And this is the only source, since we are discussing about so-called own sources on the union level, but we have not yet any in place. One source could be in the future a digital tax, and another that is discussed at least is a plastic tax, a so-called one. But that's a different issue. Today we talk about taxpayers' money in the member states of the European Union. So this is of concern for each and every taxpayer. That's also why all of us, the parliamentarians, should also convey the information about the ongoing developments in their constituencies. Regarding pushbacks of the Palestinians, so I can imagine that they try to support movements against Israel again, like the BDS movement and others, via maybe politicians and also parts of civil society and other parts of societies within Europe who are, let's say, in collaboration with them or open for these, again, anti-Semitic movements. And I would put in the larger framework of disinformation. I'm also active here in the European Parliament in the special committee against foreign interference into the European democratic structures, including disinformation. Experts also call it as a part of hybrid warfare, that from the outside there are attempts to divide our societies, to split Europe, to trigger conflicts and so on. And this is clearly not only done by state actors, but also by non-state actors. And among the non-state actors are terrorist organizations, and these terrorist organizations seek to spread disinformation within European societies, and they use each and every channel for that, because they can try whatever they want to try. If they fail, they try a different thing. It's easy for them just to spread disinformation, to divide our societies, and this is something that's ongoing, and this is maybe one of the possible pushbacks if we decide properly, but we should not be hesitant to decide properly, as always in politics. There is no alternative to decide properly with regard to values and security and everything else we've already discussed about.
And Alex, if I could just weigh in, and there will be people on this call with far more expertise than myself, but my understanding is, in relation to the funding of the EU to the Palestinian Authority, it goes through the Pegase Fund, which is again, do not hold me to the figure, but my understanding is somewhere around 350 million euro or thereabouts annually. And there was a previous question about, you know, freezing funds. Again, my understanding is a suggestion of a 5% reserve. So, you know, that's 5% of that figure, which is by no means, you know, going to be the, you know, be all and end all of the EU's funding for Palestinian Authority, but it goes to exactly to what Lukas said, which is, you know, the leverage and the importance of, you know, standing up and saying for this, you know, we will not put up with this anymore. You know, none of those figures that I have put out there, I would want to be quoted on, but I think they are kind of ballpark.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can I just say that I apologize because we're supposed to have a member of parliament for a national, from a national parliament, basically, because we heard the work of the EU. And I wanted to say that maybe one of the other things that we can do is also put pressure from the national level. Every small win, if you like, on national level contributes towards the overall EU policy. Unfortunately, we have technical problems and our member of parliament is still trying to connect. But maybe specifically on that, MEP Mandl, I wanted to say, is there something that is easier or harder to work on a national or the EU level?
In my case, it's easier. In my case, it's easier on national level, but I guess that's different from country to country. But yeah, I don't want to be, let's say, too easy about it. It's really true, and I mean it when I mention it's great to follow my political priorities in the era of Sebastian Kurz, because it's clear there's no doubt where Austria stands and what the future perspectives are with regard to the Middle East and Israel. And it's good to follow that path on a parliamentary level. It would be much more difficult for a parliamentarian. I would do it anyway, but it would be much more difficult if I had to discuss each and everything with my own prime minister, but it's quite the other way around. And I'm happy that we are like-minded and government and parliament on European level clear here. We all know that there are different histories on relations with Israel, different positions, different, I would say, prejudices as well in different European states and also EU member states. And that's why it really depends on where you come from, whether, where it's easier or less easy. But something is positive on European level. We have a strong, really multi-partisan, strongly connected, really like-minded, and let's say with a lot of mutual confidence established Transatlantic Friends of Israel network and generally Friends of Israel network, and this is a positive aspect to work, because you always know you're in a good framework of like-minded people, of goodwill. And when I call it friendship, it's also mutual. Israel is showing a lot of friendship for Europe and for EU, not only with regard to security, but with regard to academia and exchange in many different fields. And that's why we have to follow that path. I had even today the opportunity to convey the message in an interview with the public broadcaster of Austria that we urgently need a new convening of the EU-Israel Association Council and a new EU-Israel Association Agreement, because the old one is outdated, and there are so many opportunities of mutual interest that can be achieved, and that's what we have to work on. I'm afraid I will have to join to a different panel in 4 minutes, actually at 5 p.m. in Brussels time. That's why I'm running out of time a little bit, and I'm more than happy to meet all of you.
Thank you so much. We aim to finish at 5. Just my last question was to Marcus. I was going to compare the US and the Europe. I'm personally quite impressed with the amount of work that has been done here in Europe. When I started my work in Europe, I wanted to say that I had no idea that we actually had European friends, if you like. I had no idea that MEP Mandl existed. I was obviously, because of the media, I was far more aware of the work that in the US. So I wanted to ask you the tricky question. who is doing better at the moment. I do see a lot of very strong political will on both sides of the Atlantic, but maybe you can just give us an overall picture, if you like, of the continental differences.
Indeed. So you know, firstly, I would say in relation to the incitements in Palestinian textbooks and, you know, work done to stop that happening. I think the European members of Parliament, Lukas in the lead, joined by his colleagues, are absolutely exemplary. And honestly, there is no real example of that, of the amount of progress and work that has been done elsewhere. I would say that in the United States, in a parliamentary sense, that is in Congress, there is really important work being done by Mr. Brad Sherman of California, who brought into Congress what was HR 4323, the Palestinian Peace and Tolerance in Education Act, which is now, with the new Congress, they reintroduced. It is now HR 2374. It is a really important piece of legislation. It is what the Americans call bipartisan, supported on both sides of the aisle. And again, Mr. Sherman is leading the charge on that in this Congress, as he did in the last Congress. I would also say that institutionally, and I think this is actually where you know, one can really take one's hat off to the Americans. You know, looking at the State Department, the National Security Council, the White House, both in the last administration and in this administration as well, there is a real understanding about that necessity for change. There are, you know, they are constantly asking for and receiving briefings from us on the state of textbooks in the region, and particularly about Palestinian textbooks, and a high level of professionalism, which has led, as Lukas said, to Mr. Blinken saying very clearly last week, the anti-Semitism in those UNRWA textbooks as in the Palestinian textbooks taught by UNRWA, let's be clear about that, needs to be removed. He will not stand for it. His State Department will not stand for it. And I think that was extraordinarily important.
Thank you so much. We actually had problems, as I said earlier. MEP Mandl, thank you so much. Unfortunately, Lukas, please Marcus, please do stay. We had technical problems earlier, having the member of parliament. Now he finally was able to log in. So if it's okay with you, I will ask my guest to just stay for a minute longer. MEP Karagounis from the Parliament of Greece, we welcome you. If you can unmute yourself. The question I want to put to you is, we heard already from the European Parliament and briefly just now also from Mr. Marcus Sheff on the difference between the US and the European efforts that are made at the moment regarding this issue, regarding putting conditionality, if you like, on the money that the EU gives. I wanted to ask you, as a member of parliament from a national parliament, how do you see things from your perspective, and what actions can, from a national perspective, be taken regarding this? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you so much. Yes, due to technical problem, I couldn't follow all the discussion, but I'm sure that this discussion is very fruitful. And of course, congratulations once again to you, to EGA, to Rabbi Margolin, for this very interesting initiative and a very sensible topic. So let me just share with you my views. Of course, education is a right, and the EU is a very strong supporter of the right to education. And as it is well known, EU by far is the largest donor to the Palestinian Ministry of Education. It has funded many programs in order to build schools and facilitate students in attending. EU remains the biggest donor of external assistance to the Palestinians. Nevertheless, an issue has been raised with regard to the funding provided for educational purposes. For years, Israel has said that European funds have been used for textbooks that incite hate and violence. It has argued that European funds have been used by Palestinian NGOs affiliated with terrorist organizations. as of course you already mentioned. I'm sure that you have already mentioned it. It is the first time in years that the EU has made a commitment to prevent its donation, and coming to your thought, Ruth, from being used by the wrong people for the wrong reason. It has called for a proactive recovery of misused funds and thorough check of organizations receiving such funds. So this is a very, very good development. Moreover, the European Commission is held accountable for its funding, making the importance of monitoring these funds even greater. According to NGO Monitor and the Jerusalem Post, over the past 10 years, the EU has allocated some 30-80 million euros to projects involving terror-linked NGOs. Only now, UNRWA has been commissioned by the EU to remove incitement from Palestinian school textbooks, a request Israel has been making for decades, and that's true. Only now, salary paid to teachers and public servants in the education sector will be made conditional on education material that hold the UNESCO standards for peace and tolerance, etc. Only now has the EU acknowledged that thousands of children have been receiving education inciting anti-Semitism, extremism, and violence. This is a big change given the long-standing pro-Palestinian stance of the EU. No doubt, education plays an important role in forming people's opinions. Maybe not the biggest role, as opinions are also formed by what we are told within our household, especially at a younger age. They're formed by media and, of course, by personal experiences. No doubt Palestinian education is based on hatred, and Israel and the Jews are portrayed as the enemy and the vicious other. Obviously, pure hatred based on stereotypes is not the way to go. Wanting to wipe out the other from the map is not a realistic option. It is imperative that the education system is revisited and that the points of conflict are dealt with in a less passionate manner. It is difficult to see the situation with the other side's eyes, but education can help identify common ground. Education can help strengthen the lines of communication. Education can help raise the standard of living. Instead of saying burn the other, let us say how we can find a solution with the other. And this is my message, if I can say. Even in my country, Greece, we have gone through something like this. The experience of being under Ottoman rule for 400 years and the events in the 1920s have left a deep scar. Yet in the past, the education system has tried to explain certain situations in order to help subside this negative feeling. Changing school books is a difficult task and creates very staunch reactions. It has to be done in a very delicate but steady manner. And this is my message, what the EU have to do and what is it obliged to do. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. I know that our speaker also has to leave, Mr. Marcus Sheff. Unless you wanted to say something else, Marcus, feel free to maybe give some information on where our audience can reach you.
Well, our website is freely available. All of our research goes on the website, so we are utterly, transparent in that sense. I wish, frankly, the European Commission was as transparent with their research. I would like to say how fascinated I was to hear about the honourable member from Greece's comments in relation, both his remarks, which were absolutely to point, and also in relation to changes in Greece in their curriculum in relation to Ottoman rule. This is a regional phenomenon. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, Jordan, the UAE, Tunisia, in our region, in MENA, in the Middle East and North Africa, and clearly Greece as well. And I would like to think across the Balkans, curricula are being improved because peace education is absolutely intrinsic to the kind of tolerant societies we want to see in the future. Textbooks are absolutely integral to the way young people see the world. And in our region, you know, often there is not that much printed material. And so the authority of textbooks is so great that you know, obviously clearly less the case in Greece and in Israel, but in so many other countries in the region. And rulers know this. And as I pointed out, and the honourable member from Greece wasn't here when I was talking about the Turkish curriculum, but he'd be interested to know that Mr. Erdogan has made that curriculum worse. He has put into that curriculum a pan-Ottoman view of the world, which young Turkish children are now receiving. And this is a retrograde step. This is a step backwards. Those UNESCO-derived standards of peace and tolerance are essential to those societies we want to see. Respect for the other, historical accuracy, peacemaking as a way to resolve conflict.
Absolutely.
It is as true for the Palestinians as it is for my children in Israel, for children across the region and across the world. And that is really what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Dear Marcus, just to say earlier, our MEP from Austria, he said about Austria, about his chancellor, his prime minister. I just want to also boast about our own prime minister from Greece, that he's doing an excellent job. And obviously, MEP Karagounis, he's an EJ member of our advisory board, and he's really have been working very hard towards this issue. And I'll be happy, obviously, to give the details to you and to our other colleagues online. I'm going to give the floor now back to my colleague Alex Benjamin to just say goodbye, and we want to thank you once again for being with us and for this really amazing and very informative briefing. Alex.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. There's really nothing further to add. Marcus's last missive was what I call a mic drop moment. There's no way anyone could put anything better than he just put it. The future's at stake. Our youth is at stake. My daughter, kids in Israel, kids in the West Bank, whatever, they're all entitled to a decent education free from hate, which is extremely important. We thank everyone for their time today, and we'll revisit this issue. This is an issue which keeps on going, and I'm sure we'll catch you further on down the road. So thank you everyone for your attendance. We stand by ready to answer any questions. Check out Impact SE, which is amazing work, Marcus Kolakavod. And that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you at our next briefing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.